Welcome to today's video, where we will be exploring the fascinating connections between the art of drumming and the art of forging and their deep mythological roots in Indo-European cultures. These two practices may seem vastly different at first glance, but upon closer inspection we will discover that they share a profound symbolism and have been closely intertwined throughout history. From the use of drums in ritual communication and transformation to the forging of powerful weapons for the gods, we will delve into the rich mythological traditions of various Indo-European cultures, examining the recurring motifs and symbols that have persisted across time and space. So sit back, relax, and get ready to discover the powerful connections between drumming, forging, and the enduring power of myth. Although the sources regarding drumming for ceremonial purposes in ancient Europe are scarce, there is some evidence that drumming was used by the Indo-European people, which we can see from the references to the use of drums in the Vedas. The Rig Veda, one of the four Vedas, contains hymns that describe the use of drums in various rituals, and the drums were believed to have the power to awaken the divine forces. This belief was common to many ancient cultures. There is also a symbolic relationship between the beating of the drum and the human heartbeat. The rhythmic sound of the drum is said to mimic the beating of the human heart, which is the source of life and vitality. The symbolic relationship between the shaman and the blacksmith varies across different cultures, but there are some commonalities. In many cultures, the blacksmith is seen as a powerful figure who can transform raw materials, such as metal, into useful objects. This transformation is often seen as magical or spiritual in nature, and the blacksmith may be seen as a mediator between the spiritual and material worlds. Similarly, the shaman is seen as a mediator between the spiritual and physical worlds. The shaman may use various tools such as drums, rattles, or other objects to induce trance states and communicate with the spiritual realm. The blacksmith and the shaman may also be associated with fire, as both of them use fire to essentially purify and transform. One of the main characteristics of some shamans was their ability to master fire, which meant that they were unharmed by it, and as we have seen in the previous video, this is exactly what the participants in the Bulgarian rituals do as well. They walk barefoot on fire and they are unharmed. In some cultures, such as among the Yakut people in Siberia, the shaman is often seen as a master of metalworking and may even create magical metal objects, such as amulets or talismans, to aid in their spiritual work. In other cultures, such as among the Hmong people of Southeast Asia, the shaman may work closely with blacksmiths to create tools and objects for ritual purposes. Similarly, in some Native American cultures, the blacksmith was seen as a shamanic figure who could connect with the spiritual world through his work. In some South Slavic countries like North Macedonia, Serbia, and Bulgaria, the selection of a drummer within traditional music groups follows unusual principles that are more rooted in myth rather than rationality. Drummers are frequently chosen from the Roma population, and evidence suggests that this practice has its origin in the mythological past of the people, which has been passed down as a superstition. There is also a strange connection between drumming and blacksmithing in these countries, as the Roma are also said to be destined to be blacksmiths, while local residents believed that the craft was invented by the devil, that is to say, the demon of the lower world, hence why it is not practiced by them. This also refers to drumming. There are many legends and stories about blacksmiths selling their souls to the devil, and this relationship between the Roma and blacksmithing has even been included into ritual traditions. The blacksmith is often equated with a Roma or a foreigner in South Slavic masked winter processions, some of which are called Koledari or Kukeri, Jalamari and Vasilichari. And there is a comparison made between metallurgy and drumming, with the blacksmith being considered a magician and a priest. People believed that the Roma and members of the black or other races and cultures were associated with underworld spirits because of their appearance, leading them to think that these individuals had supernatural or magical powers due to their connection to otherworldly beings. The connection between these two activities is also linked to the shamanic aspect of the culture, with the blacksmith being seen as a mediator between the two worlds. Due to these beliefs, the function of blacksmith was often fulfilled by newcomers or people of other ethnicities, and the blacksmith's forge was often located outside of the settlement for both practical and cultural reasons. At the same time, this foreignness had to be visually verified as well, through the specific racial characteristics of the metallurgists, mostly the dark skin tone, which clearly differentiated them from our people, or rather the people of our world. Comparative studies reveal that both in the ancient times and among current primitive societies, blacksmiths were not regarded simply as skilled workers and producers. Their intricate and mystifying trade, which was intimidating to the average person, was placed in the realm of magic and the demonic. The blacksmith was viewed as a magician or priest, while his workshop was considered a spiritually dangerous or impure place that needed to be located outside of the settlement due to its association with the otherworldly. As such, the blacksmith symbolically resided in the other world. The archaic people held a fascination for metals, their appearance and properties and the process of working with them, and believed that metals came from the world of the gods or of the ancestors. This was largely due to their origin being in the earth, where the dead reside. Hence why mythical characters often associated with metalsmithing and mining, such as dwarves, came to represent them. As a result, they saw metalsmiths as mediators who, surrounded by the liquid fire and the rain of sparks, traveled to the other world in order to bring back the metals. Because of this, the blacksmith was viewed as a demonic figure, blackened like an otherworldly spirit. And this is essentially why the Roma people or other dark-skinned people came to be associated with the other world. The understanding that the otherworld spirits are black was already rooted in the population due to the fact that the dead reside underground, where the sun does not shine. This is why offerings to chthonic spirits across all of ancient Europe were always performed after sunset. This understanding stems from our prehistoric past and has similarities in both Europe and Asian shamanic cultures, where people would cover their faces with black soot and wear animal skins to impersonate the spirits of the dead in order to access their realm. This was mostly performed by the shamans. A Christianized variation of this ritual exists today in the form of Black Pit, the companion of Saint Nicholas, which essentially represents the same thing as the superstitious South Slavic belief that the Roma or the other dark-skinned people originate from the underworld and are in connection with the devil. Another thing which emphasizes the connection of blackness with the underworld is the fact that in South Slavic medieval poetry and folk songs following the Ottoman conquest of the Balkans, we often see that the dragon of the underworld was portrayed as a black Arab or a Turk, who was essentially a foreigner. And like the spirits of the mines, the dragon also possesses underground riches, and he was an avatar of the ancient Slavic chthonic deity Veles, who had the epithet Chernobog, meaning black god. Therefore, the selection of dark-skinned individuals as drummers and blacksmiths implies that drumming was primarily associated with the spirits of the deceased and the chief deity of the underworld. In addition to this, it is interesting to consider the link between the Greek words goes, which roughly translates as shaman, and goetos, which is an epithet for the ancient Hellenic dwarves called dactyls, who were a mythical race of men credited with the inventing of iron. The association between metallurgy and drumming is also evident, as these spirits were thought to have invented musical rhythm through the rhythmic hammering of the forge, which is an integral part of the ironworking process. Orpheus, revered as a heavenly vocalist and a shamanic archetype, strengthens the shamanic essence of this association, for he was also depicted as a teacher and a student of the dactyls. The myths surrounding Cadmus are also particularly noteworthy, as it was believed that he introduced metallurgy to the Balkans. This is even more significant when one takes into account his Eastern origin, as indicated by his name Cadmo, which means Eastern in Phoenician. The information and connections presented here complete a hypothetical stage of interweaving between the three mentioned activities. It is believed that in the ancient and archaic cultures, the shaman, priest or sorcerer held all the roles of a proto-priest, a proto-drummer and a proto-metallurgist, united also in the mythical image of a chthonic deity. Over time, as the integral and sacred and utilitarian system was dismantled, these three functions became separate and specialized, with individuals dedicating themselves solely to one role, the priest only being a priest, a metallurgist only being a metallurgist, and the drummer only being a drummer. Evidence of this initial non-differentiation can also be found in South Slavic culture up until the mid-20th century in Macedonia and some other parts of the Balkans. Its practitioners were the Roma people, who, by their ethnicity, were explicitly designated for the two specific roles, metallurgy and drumming. The third role, that of a priest, was implicitly present as well and is well documented in ethnographic literature. This is demonstrated by the magical and healing nature of iron and the blacksmiths who performed various magical and healing rituals. All these activities often incorporated elements from the forge, such as various iron products, tools, iron powder, tempering water, iron jewelry, and amulets. All of this is very similar to the role of the previously mentioned shaman among the Yakut people, who was also a blacksmith. The lack of differentiation between these activities is also clearly evident in the realm of language. For example, the Slavic root kov, found in words such as kovanje and kovač, meaning forge or forging, and blacksmith, is believed by some to come from the same etymological root used for terms such as priest, sorcerer, and poet in other Indo-European languages. This concept is also evident in Slavic languages, where the verb kovati, meaning to forge, is used to describe not only metallurgical and crafting activities, but also craftsmanship in general, as well as art and magic, that is, sorcery. This usage often carries a negative connotation. For example, plotting against someone is often referred to as forging a conspiracy. The Old Slavic word cousin or kozan has multiple meanings beyond its metallurgical interpretations as blacksmith in Russian, kuznets, and in Serbian, kuzničar. It is similar to the Greek term tichni or techni, which means art, and encompasses both craftsmanship and art, with kuznik or koznik translating to artist. In some cases, it is specifically used to refer to music making. In Slavic, Germanic, and Romance languages, there are expressions where forging refers to the creation of words, songs, and language, pointing to the magical and archaic aspects of these phenomena. According to the Hindu mythology, the god Shiva created the ancient Sanskrit language based on the rhythm of his drum Damaru. As such, forging is not only closely linked to drumming and music, but also to artistic creativity in general, and all of these pursuits were perceived as mystical, which explains their interconnectedness. The mystical perception of these activities was rooted in their designation as sacred and arcane knowledge stemming from the Underworld, and European mythologies commonly depict the Underworld inhabitants as the most wise and knowledgeable beings. Eastern Slavic traditions also feature myths where the blacksmith is seen as a cultural hero credited with creating the first plow, harnessing a dragon to it, and introducing agriculture to humanity. The interdependence displayed between the distinct functions, the blacksmith, the drummer, and the shaman, may be traced to striking, which serves as a fundamental principle of action that is shared among them. This striking can be with a stick in the shamanic and ordinary drumming, or with a hammer on an anvil in metallurgy. Metallurgy and music bring together two additional elements, one of which is rhythm. But there is also the sound of metal, which also has a significant magical and religious meaning as a call to positive forces or protection against negative ones. Additionally, there is a story recorded in Rasina, Serbia, that highlights the connection between blacksmiths and shamans. The story portrays a blacksmith selling his soul to the devil, and the devil eventually climbs a tree while the blacksmith beats him with an iron rod from underneath. Now, the position of the devil within this story serves no actual purpose. However, this image carries potential shamanic meaning, as it shows the devil's position aligning with the basic shamanic concept of the shaman traveling to the other world through a cosmic tree, with the repetitive rhythm of the beating being a key aspect. Our pre-Christian ancestors were unfamiliar with a figure such as the devil, as it was only incorporated into their religious beliefs by Christianity when adapting earlier cults to align with their own concepts. Throughout this transformation, many heroes, spirits, and deities were Christianized and either transformed into saints or devils. As we previously saw, the dark underground spirits who the Roma population personified were said to be in contact with the devil, also imagined as a black being who was regarded as their leader. In the South Slavic mythology and folklore, the devil has a very important role, and the Serbian ethnologist Veselin Čakanović has demonstrated that his attributes were mostly inherited from the pre-Christian chthonic deity. He had a limp, but was nevertheless imagined as an endless wanderer who traveled at great speed. In his underworld realm, he kept many riches and was regarded as being a master of all crafts and skills. His epithets are master and imaginative or inventive, for he was a creator and founder of many things. Some of them are the mill, the scythe, metal smithing, and so forth. According to legend, he possessed vast knowledge in herbalism and medicine, which he shared with the people. The locals even named certain holy water springs Devil's Water due to their healing properties, especially for the eyes. Though his main role was to take the spirits of the deceased, following Christianity, this was limited to only those who were sinful. Accompanied by wolves, the devil was believed to be their herdsman. Additionally, he possessed a magical hat that held his life force and was regarded as a shapeshifter. There is much more to be said about this figure, and numerous signs suggest that the devil obtained these qualities from the South Slavic or Common Slavic underworld deity. However, the most notable proof is his name Dabo, which originates from Dabog or Daibog, signifying giving God in English. Veselin Čajkanović has correctly stated that the Serbian and South Slavic Dabog represents a religious epiclesis of the common Slavic deity Veles, and should therefore not be mistaken for the solar deity Dashbog, referenced in medieval Russian texts. If we take into account that the initial name of the sun god was Svarozhić, and the original name of the underworld deity was Veles, it is apparent that the designation giving god could have been applied to various deities. Likewise, Veles is known by the name Chernobog, as we previously saw, which means black god, because of his association with the subterranean realm. Veles, the Slavic god of the underworld, was gradually replaced by the devil in other Baltic and Slavic regions as well. This is why among the Western Slavs, the name Veles can be found in 15th and 16th century Czech records, where it is used to mean devil. Similarly, his Baltic counterpart, Velnias, is still used today as a name for the devil, whereas the spirits of the dead are called Veles. Given that it has been established that Veles is the basis for the figure of the devil, it shows that the dark spirits over which he presides are actually ancestral spirits. Moreover, Veles is associated with music, arts, crafts, and sorcery, which aligns perfectly with the attributes commonly ascribed to shamans, blacksmiths, and drummers. To further reinforce this idea, among certain Eastern Slavic peoples, the devil is also referred to as Ditko, which translates to grandfather, further emphasizing his close connection to the ancestral realm. Considering all of these factors and analyzing them from a mythical perspective, we can conclude that the abilities associated with arts, sorcery, and creativity originate from the ancestral realm and the collective unconscious of our psyche. We can also interpret the mythical weapons crafted by these spirits as objects that were originally buried with the deceased. While we won't delve too deeply into the specifics of Veles, it is worth noting one important attribute that was mentioned earlier: his limp. This characteristic is particularly significant as it strongly suggests that he was a god associated with metalworking among many other things. We can be quite certain of this connection, as it was a common trait among blacksmith gods and mythical figures throughout ancient Europe to have a limp. In Greek mythology, for example, Hephaestus, the god of metallurgy and blacksmithing, became lame after being thrown out of Olympus by his mother Hera. His Roman counterpart, Vulcan, who was renowned for crafting weapons for the gods, was also depicted as limping. Similarly, the Germanic blacksmith Wayland or Volund was also often depicted as having a limp. The root of why legendary smiths are depicted as disabled is connected to the fact that blacksmiths during the Bronze Age would often experience arsenic poisoning due to the harmful fumes in their working environment. This kind of poisoning damages the nerves and results in a limp. The association between Veles and this characteristic is so strong that in South Slavic folklore, Veles is portrayed as a wolf with a limp who is the master of all other wolves. Veles is an intriguing and multifaceted deity that I have explained in my books. He bears resemblances not only to Odin and Hermes but other deities as well. A comprehensive understanding of his essence would necessitate a separate video. In Serbian folklore there exists the character known as the Silver Tsar, who is made out of silver and is recognized as the ruler of the mines. Nonetheless, by taking into account his dwelling in Daibok Hill, it is apparent that he represents an ancient subterranean deity Veles, who presides over earthly wealth. According to the tales, the Silver Tsar was benevolent and permitted miners to extract abundant resources from beneath the ground. However, if they showed him disrespect, he would summon the rivers to flood the mines and drown the miners. This is highly compatible with his position as a deity of blacksmithing, since, as mentioned earlier, mining and metallurgy are closely related. This correlation is also evident in Norse mythology and later Germanic folklore, where the Dwarves, who are renowned for their exceptional craftsmanship and metallurgy skills, are also depicted as proficient miners. Interestingly, we can see this association in ancient Egyptian culture as well, where the god Ptah, who was the patron deity of craftsmen and metallurgy, was portrayed as a dwarf. In the Old Kingdom, it was common to consider dwarves as knowledgeable experts in the field of goldsmithing and metallurgy. It is worth mentioning that, in addition to crafting exceptional objects, the dwarves in Norse mythology were responsible for producing the mead of poetry. This legendary beverage, made from the blood of Kvasir, imparted the gift of poetic talent to those who consumed it. This further reinforces the notion that the act of forging is not limited only to the creation of physical objects, but also encompasses the art of poetry and music. Dwarves are often associated with residing inside stones and mountains, especially hollow ones, and burial mounds, which may be derived from their association with the dead, who were frequently buried in mounds and around megaliths. Similarly, in Slavic mythology, there is the belief that stones can contain the spirits of the dead, and people would place stones with the deceased to prevent their spirits from returning and haunting the family. However, this is also where the concept of memorial tombstones stems from, for the stone was initially meant to house the spirit of the dead person, further supporting the notion that dwarves were originally associated with the dead residing in burial mounds is their relationship to the elves. Setting aside modern interpretations of these mythical beings which are influenced by contemporary fantasy, a closer examination of mythology and folklore reveals that dwarves and elves were likely once the same entities. This is significant because elves were traditionally viewed to represent the ancestral spirits, which suggests that dwarves were also closely linked to the ancestral cult. What is especially interesting for our research is that the medieval Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson described the dwarves as black elves and dark elves, and noted that they differ from ordinary elves in the fact that they are ugly and reside underground, whereas the elves are more beautiful than the sun. The association between elves and light is also reflected in the etymology of the word elf, which means white, and can be linked to the ancestral spirits. On the other hand, the Dark Elves who dwell underground are associated with the buried dead in the burial mounds. As the dead were often buried with their valuable objects, the mythical objects crafted by the Dwarves were likely originally intended to represent these objects. However, the distinction between light and dark elves is not always clear. In some later folklore accounts, elves and dwarves are described as the same beings, and both are said to avoid sunlight, suggesting that they are chthonic creatures. However, this fact is not relevant to our research. What is important is that the superstitions among the South Slavic people regarding the Roma or other dark-skinned people, who are seen as possessing chthonic qualities such as metalworking, drumming and sorcery, have their roots in ancient Slavic mythology, which has parallels in other European mythologies. Despite our limited resources of Slavic mythology and the fact that dwarves are primarily associated with Germanic culture, we can identify the same concept of mythical, chthonic, and skilled dark creatures associated with metallurgy, craftsmanship, music, and sorcery, not only in Slavic mythology but also in other European mythologies. The idea that European mythologies have a shared origin, possibly even predating the Indo-European period, is supported by the presence of similar mythic concepts and symbols in cultures outside of the Indo-European tradition. However, this does not necessarily have to be a result of direct communication or influence between the cultures, for certain religious and symbolic ideas may have arisen independently among widely separated cultures throughout history. Carl Jung referred to these recurring cross-cultural symbols and concepts as archetypes. Despite the close association between drumming and forging, and their connection to the chthonic realm, a question remains as to how they are also associated with thunder and lightning, which are commonly associated with the storm gods. Traditional cultures that incorporate drumming as a form of music and ritual often associate the rhythm of the heartbeat with the sound of the thunder. This connection can be traced back to ancient European cultures, who believed that the pumping of blood through the veins was akin to the powerful strikes of thunderbolts. It is for this reason that many people in these cultures wore pendants featuring the weapon of their thunder god on their chest. In other words, the weapon of the thunder god was frequently used as a representation of the pulsating heart, which symbolized the vital energy present in both humans and the world around them. After death, the human heart ceases to beat and rests in the underworld, until the individual is reborn in a new body, at which point the heart is symbolically retrieved from the chthonic realm. This is one reason why drums were used to awaken every power of life, and why they were employed for communication with the deceased. This connection is often expressed through myths of chthonic metalsmiths crafting the weapons of the storm gods, as seen in Norse mythology with the dwarves who forge Mjolnir for Thor, or in Greek mythology with the Cyclops who craft the thunderbolt of Zeus in their forge beneath Mount Etna. Similar myths can also be found in some Serbian epic poetry, such as the story of Prince Marko, who seeks a sword from Novak the blacksmith before dawn, which further emphasizes the chthonic nature of the blacksmith. Thank you so much for joining me in this video. I hope that you found the information interesting and that it has given you a new appreciation for the power of myth and symbolism. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. And consider some of my books if you're interested to learn more. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below. I'd love to hear from you. And once again, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.